Part of the reason so many people have a negative view of capitalism is that they always think it's this faceless, greedy corporation that represents capitalism. They don't know the stories of the individuals behind these businesses. Elon's rocket was caught by those chopsticks. How many people, young people especially, got inspired to want to start their own business, to develop new technology, to do something to advance humanity like he did there?
Hello and welcome to the IEA YouTube channel. My name is Reem Ibrahim and I'm the Communications Manager here at the Institute of Economic Affairs. If you are interested in learning more about the IEA's work and joining the insider community, please do check out insider.iea.org.uk. Today, I am absolutely delighted to be joined by a Liberty Movement heavyweight, Alexander McCobin. Alexander is the founder and CEO at Liberty Ventures. Previously, he was the CEO of Conscious Capitalism, as well as the co-founder and president of Students for Liberty. Before that, he was on the path to become a philosophy professor, receiving a BA and an MA from the University of Pennsylvania and MA from Georgetown University. Alexander lives out of 2 suitcases when he's not on the old family farm in Sullivan County, Pennsylvania. Alexander, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Ree.
We were trying to do this interview for so long, and I'm so glad that we've finally been able to sit down and actually get to it. I, first of all, want to hear a bit about your personal philosophy and where you've actually been able to come to the perspective that you have today. So, first of all, what is your personal philosophy? What do you believe when it comes to the relationship between the state and the individual? And why do you think that these perspectives are moral?
So I'm glad you clarified that, because a personal philosophy can be a lot broader than just a political view. And so I won't get into all of that. But my philosophy is pretty straightforward. It's the concept that the principle of liberty, of allowing individuals to do what they want so long as they're not harming others, should guide political decision-making. That's different from policy recommendations or any political stances. It's meant to be a set of values that informs our judgments for policies and engagement with politics. But it's a sound guide that allows for both human flourishing from a utilitarian perspective, but also respects the individual rights of human beings from a deontological perspective.
That's wonderful. And how did you come to this perspective that actually expanding that freedom for the individual and that kind of perspective on autonomy, how did you come to that perspective, and why do you think it is the most moral philosophy?
So it's something that I think I believed from a very young age, but it was encapsulated for me when I turned 14 and my dad gave me a copy of Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand for my birthday. It took me a month to read over the summer, but when I finished, I was hooked. Now, my views have evolved since then. I think there is so much to learn from Rand, but I disagree with some of the principles that she articulated back in the day that I used to espouse, like the virtue of selfishness, or there are a number of other things from there, but that's a clear, obvious one. And in an important way, my views have evolved in that I think Rand and even some other great libertarian thinkers like Milton Friedman engaged in what we now call clickbait back in the day. That phrase, the virtue of selfishness, is a great way to bring people in to read books and articles, but it's not actually a philosophically sound perspective, and it's not how we're going to bring more people over to our side. My views have evolved in understanding that the principle of liberty is this amazing intersection of deontological respect for the rights and dignity of human beings as ends in themselves that ultimately does lead to human flourishing and prosperity from a consequentialist perspective, because there is a connection between people being able to make decisions for themselves and actually leading happier and better lives. So there's a lot that we could get into there, but it started with Rand and has evolved much more since then.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I think predominantly because when we talk about morality and the morality of freedom, and I want to hear about how you define freedom in a moment, but what's interesting about that is there are both the kind of first principles basis, this idea that, at the IEA we talk about free markets and free exchange, that free exchange is moral because it's based on an exchange of value for value. It's based on consent. It's the voluntary exchange of goods and services. But it's also producing moral outcomes from a consequentialist perspective, that actually, millions of people are being lifted out of poverty, that actually there are so many people across the world that are seeing the benefits and feeling the benefits of freedom and of the expansion of freedom. So it's really interesting from a first principles basis and from a consequentialist perspective, and actually that morality can come from both and not just the first principles.
And not just that it can, it necessarily does. That's the uniqueness of the world as constructed and what it means to be a human being and a moral agent. In philosophy, we engage in a lot of counterfactuals. You think, what would happen, or what would be the moral consequence if something wasn't the case? And so a common one to separate deontological and consequentialist approaches to morality is to say, well, what if these diverge? Which one are you going to choose? And there might be some individual cases where that is, but on the whole, with the way reality is constructed, they actually are intermeshed with one another. And part of what I think is important for us to do in philosophical engagement is understand the actual, the metaphysical contours of the world and how that impacts morality. And so they necessarily do go with one another.
Yes, I think it's really interesting. And the fact that it has to necessarily come together. A lot of other libertarians, I would say, that don't necessarily make the consequentialist arguments. And that's why I think it's so interesting that there are those different perspectives, even within libertarian philosophy, which most of our audience will somewhat be aware of. And just on that basis, more broadly, the term liberty has been used time and time again throughout many, both political campaigns, but also in day-to-day language. What does liberty actually mean to you?
So again, that's really broad and can encompass a lot of things. But beyond just the concept of allow people to do what they want to if it's not harming other people in the world, when it comes to Liberty Ventures, say, and what I'm running now, the premise of Liberty is about establishing a set of values that people are able to work with each other on because they share those values. And first and foremost of that is being pro-capitalism. And that includes its own set of values because capitalism isn't this abstract economic system. It is premised on certain foundational principles that have allowed, that again, not only respects in human dignity, but leads to the flourishing of humanity that we've seen over the last 200 years with the advent of the system. Principles like respect for individual agency and choice, mutual cooperation, the increasing opportunities for individuals. These are baked into the concept of capitalism and are important for our business leaders themselves to embrace, both to be advocates of and representatives of the system in which they operate, but then also to derive the greatest benefits from capitalism that we can.
I want to hear so much more about Liberty Ventures as well, and we will come on to it in more detail. I want to hear a little bit about the history around how you actually got to the position that you're in today. So when it comes to your perspective on capitalism, and you've defined capitalism as being particularly moral and as being a moral philosophical system, but also that free exchange being moral in itself, and of course producing moral consequences. And you founded Students for Liberty, which is one of, I think, the most incredible international network of young people that we see today. I was so heavily influenced by the friends I made at Students for Liberty when I was growing up as a teenager, and I think I wouldn't be where I am today without Students for Liberty. So thank you for founding such an organisation. But how did this even come about? What's the history behind it? Tell us your story.
Well, I told you, my dad gave me a copy of Atlas Shrugged when I was 14. I was in high school, and I spent the rest of my high school years reading as much philosophy as I could. And when I went off to college at the University of Pennsylvania, I thought to myself, I'm going to be surrounded by all these smart people. I'm going to get to actually engage them in interesting ideas, who finally be around people who agreed with me. But this was 2004 to 2006. I didn't meet a single other person who thought the same way I did for the first 2 years. I began to feel so isolated and alone. I actually thought to myself, Alexander, if you're the only one with these views, maybe you're crazy. Maybe you should just give up and become a socialist and make your life easier. But thankfully, instead of doing that, I decided to start a group on campus, the Penn Libertarians. And within a year, we had over 200 members on our listserv. Students, even professors came out of the woodwork. And I realized they had always been there, but we needed an organization to bring us together. And the summer before my senior year, I was interning in Washington, D.C. at another libertarian organization, the Reason Foundation, and met students from other schools who were running their own clubs. And there was no organization helping us out at that time, nationally or globally, or I said, let's all just get in a room and share best practices with each other on student organizing for liberty. That event with 12 people was so successful. I said, what do you guys think about making this a little bit bigger, get 30 students together in New York City? And I got a few other people to help put that together. And it turned into the first Students for Liberty conference with 100 students from 42 schools in 3 countries making their way through a blizzard in New York to get to this. And it really blew us away. Where Students for Liberty is now, for anyone who's familiar, it's an incredible global organization with tens of thousands of students around the world. There was nothing like that. 100 students in one room was the biggest pro-liberty student event, as far as I know, in the history, certainly in the 2000s back then. And so we said we need to keep this going and started what we thought would be a small volunteer-only nonprofit organization just focused on the U.S. And over the years, it's snowballed into something much bigger than we ever could have expected.
And it's expanded across the world so significantly. I mean, a lot of our IATP partners, for those that don't know, IATP is the Initiative for African Trade and Prosperity. It's sort of a project of the IEA. And so many of those partners from these African countries came from Students for Liberty and then decided to found their own think tanks and their own organizations. So really, the kind of impact is twofold. The multiplier effect of such an organization where effectively these young minds are being developed and are able to then develop into organizations, into so many different widespread educational programs. Actually, the multiplier effect of an organization like that is just incredible. And at the moment, I mean, it feels as though there's nothing more important at the moment than getting the next generation of young people on board with these particular ideas. There was some polling done very recently by the Fraser Institute that found that 53% of 18 to 34-year-olds in the UK believe that socialism is the ideal economic system. Similar statistics in the US and indeed in Canada. What's really interesting about that is there seems to be this generational divide. Now, I am Gen Z, and there is this generational divide where the majority of people that are in Gen Z don't believe in the principles of capitalism. The stuff that we spoke about right at the beginning, that this idea that actually the free market, that voluntary exchange is moral from a deontological perspective, but also from a consequentialist perspective. How do you think then is the sort of the best way forward, the best method to convincing the next generation of young people that freedom is the way forward?
So I think it is critical to get to the next generation. It always is, because ideas are not static. The world is not static. We always have to keep re-educating people, not just the next generation, but even ourselves. We were talking beforehand about how people change over time, and people can forget the principles that they came up with, or they can forget what they learned before. So we need to keep relearning things. But it's an interesting situation because between 2008 and 2016, when I was leading Students for Liberty, it seemed like support for capitalism and liberty was on the rise with young people. And I mean, there were cover stories in The Economist saying the next generation is libertarian and featuring some leaders here in the UK that we have. And there was a shift going on. But for some reason, over the last 8 years, it seems like things have changed. And there could be a number of reasons for that, but we need to make the enthusiasm for and study of liberty in the next generation something that's interesting and exciting and a pathway for success for them, which just doesn't seem to be the case right now.
And how would you then, sort of in a couple of sentences, define that for young people? Because so much of the time, these kind of concepts are sort of confused with other ideas, and they're not necessarily communicated as clearly as they could be. I, for example, work in the communications team at the IEA. My entire job is basically to take what very, very clever academics say and turn it into ideas and content and information that people understand and want to listen to. How would you explain to a young person that capitalism is moral, that it is the most wonderful economic system that could possibly exist, but also that it is the most moral economic system?
Well, here's one important thing. There's no one-size-fits-all for what's going to persuade everyone in a generation or everyone in the world to support liberty. It's very individualized. And this is in part because liberty is individualized. It's not just a philosophical concept that exists for people in the abstract. It's embodied in people being able to choose the life that they want to live. So I actually think a big part of this ought to be having one-on-one conversations or small group conversations with young people to understand what they want to do in life, what kind of world they want to bring about, and helping them understand that only with a system of free exchange of ideas, free exchange of economic opportunities, are they going to have the opportunity to contribute to creating that world and allowing that to flourish. That takes a lot of work, actually. Everyone wants a silver bullet to advance whatever their cause is in the world. And I just don't think that exists. It's a lot of hard, on-the-ground conversations and work. And we need more people out there having conversations with young people and get more young people who share our views out there talking with their peers about this instead of trying to find the one-size-fits-all silver bullet.
And it's so difficult because of the way in which, I suppose, cancel culture and the way in which people feel that they're able to even discuss these ideas. I mean, you said that you experienced this as a student, being seemingly one of the only people that believes in pro-liberty ideas. When I went to LSE for my undergraduate degree, I was one of the only people that believed in liberty. I think that it's so interesting because when it feels as though your professors, your peers, the student union, everyone is against you. And actually, in so many cases where you actually can't physically have events, you can't physically talk about these ideas for fear of being, told that you're not allowed to do those things, or even fear of expulsion in some cases. How do you inspire and sort of allow people to have that kind of courage to speak up?
So it was a different time when I went to college. I mean, Facebook just came to my campus. The semester that I went there, it was one of the first few schools, and I spent the first 2 months in college without a Facebook account. I didn't want to get it, and then it took over for everyone. But this was long before cancel culture was a thing. So it's very different now. But I think things are starting to change. Cancel culture is receding right now. More people are starting to recognize, including young people, that there should be an opportunity for them to explore new ideas and to be given some leeway to explore different ideas in developing their personal views. And so I think the most important thing is for us to, encourage young people to have the courage to speak up and explore this, but also give more leniency and space for people to have different ideas. And that includes for those who disagree with us. We can't have people who support liberty attacking and trying to cancel those who disagree with liberty as vehemently as some are. That it impedes the opportunity for us to have meaningful dialogue and discourse and get at a sense that we ought to prioritize the conversation as a part of the process of advancing liberty.
I think you're absolutely right. One of my favourite quotes is, "I will defend to the death your right to make an ass of yourself." And I think it was Oscar Wilde that said that initially, although it's a variation of a slightly more serious quote. And the point is that, we believe in this kind of J.S. Mill-esque marketplace of ideas, the idea that actually the best ideas will ultimately rise to the top, and we're able to have these open conversations. But it doesn't, from a freedom of speech perspective, we do have to defend the good and the bad and the seemingly ugly and the seemingly grotesque in order for us to be able to have those open dialogues. So I completely agree with you. After Students for Liberty, you had a, very, very, very long successful career, and you ended up founding something called Conscious Capitalism. Could you tell us what conscious capitalism is and what it means as a concept, but also what the organization was and why you decided to do something like that?
Well, to be clear, I didn't start Conscious Capitalism.
Right, okay.
When I was at Students for Liberty, I got to work with some incredible young people doing everything from leading protests in Brazil in 2016 that led to the impeachment of the president for corruption, to starting unicorns in Silicon Valley like Thumbtack, who was begun by one of the guys who first helped us get Students for Liberty off the ground. But I also got to connect with some incredible business leaders who were supporting the organization, including John Mackey, the founder of Whole Foods, who had written a book called Conscious Capitalism, which is a philosophy of elevating humanity through business, a different way of thinking about capitalism that actually flies in the face of the idea that capitalism is premised on selfishness and greed, and actually says that capitalism is about helping other people out and serving a higher purpose than maximizing profit. And John and I became close when I was at Students for Liberty, and through him, I was recruited to go and run Conscious Capitalism, the nonprofit that was started to share that philosophy with other business leaders.
That's so interesting. And how would you define the difference between conscious capitalism and regular old capitalism, or at least capitalism in the way that older philosophers might have defined it? What is the difference between that kind of capitalism and a conscious capitalism?
So this is the interesting thing. I don't think John would say that they're different at all, and I don't think they are. The difference is between conscious capitalism and selfish capitalism or profit maximization capitalism. It's a branding exercise more than anything else. But it's about articulating that capitalism is fundamentally about us working together with other people to create value for other people. And money is simply a means to support that. It's not an end in itself, the way that some have tried to portray capitalism. And that it's not just about us pursuing our own interests at the expense of others. It's actually about us pursuing the interests of others to benefit ourselves, because that's the way that we find alignment of interest and create value for everyone.
That's really interesting. Also I would say one of my favorite economists is Israel Kirzner from the Austrian school. And he spoke a lot about entrepreneurs effectively finding resources that have up until that point been undervalued and then them creating value. And ultimately, an entrepreneur in a capitalist or free market economy has to create something that other people also want. There is no way that an entrepreneur can be successful and can even create the revenue or the means or the profit. They can't do that without creating products or services that other people voluntarily give their money to. So I think it's interesting from that perspective, even thinking about capitalism in that way. It's in some ways a slightly different branding exercise of what free markets actually are. I want to hear about Liberty Ventures. What is Liberty Ventures? What is the philosophy behind it? Tell us the story.
So I started Liberty Ventures about 1.5 years ago after my time at Conscious Capitalism for 2 reasons. One was that I was surrounded by so many incredible business leaders at Conscious Capitalism, but it was set up as an organization to talk about these ideas as the nonprofit and couldn't facilitate business between them because of its structure. But any good conscious capitalist doesn't just want to talk about these things. They want to go out and actually build businesses on their values. And so I wanted to create a platform for like-valued business leaders to be able to do that. But also, going to your last question, there are a lot of people who hear the term conscious capitalism and actually think it's a critique of capitalism. Or as John is putting it nowadays, they've started to take that term and weaponize it against the actual philosophy of conscious capitalism. And I wanted to have an organization that was much more explicitly pro-capitalism so that we can find those business leaders who understand the system in which they operate, appreciate it, and are willing to stand up for those values, both in the way that they do business and in how they in what they advocate for, because we need business leaders to actually stand up for capitalism. Otherwise, we risk losing this system in today's world. And so Liberty Ventures now is a network of business leaders who are committed to a free and prosperous future, to the principles of capitalism. And we connect them with one another to support each other in scaling impactful businesses to make the world a better place, sometimes through investing, sometimes through providing experts and advisors and mentors to help them, a talent network, or even just making sure that there are events and opportunities for them to get to know each other.
That's absolutely wonderful. I think it's so important to, well, first of all, know that there are entrepreneurs that are pro-capitalism in the first place, but also, most libertarians are fully aware of the fact that there are many, many businesses that actively use the political system against competition, against free enterprise. There are so many companies that do get tax exemptions from various different governments, that actually often lobby governments for special privileges, that lobby governments for further regulation, because these larger companies can absorb those regulatory costs better than new, smaller entrants can in the market. So it's really important, I think, to always know who are the sound entrepreneurs and also what are they doing to promote the system that benefits not just themselves, but also the system that benefits human flourishing as a whole for the entire world. So I think it's interesting from that perspective. Could you tell me what Liberty Ventures does practically? I've seen you do interviews with different business leaders. I've seen you promote those particular ideas. How are you connecting those entrepreneurs, and what are the practical implications of that work?
So one important note is that it's not just the entrepreneurs that we work with. It's investors and executives as well. And it's important to get them engaged in this from the investors' side so that they're deploying capital to support like-valued entrepreneurs in order to help them on their rise to become business leaders in the future, build those connections early on, and make money together in order to support these values. It's also important for executives who share these views to know that there are others out there who think the same way as them, that they're not alone. In fact, in a lot of ways, the business world is kind of like where I was when I was a student at university back in the day, where there aren't many places for business leaders who share these values to go meet with others, to know that they're not alone. There actually is a lot of anti-capitalism sentiment in the business community back in the US and around the world, unfortunately, for reasons like what you pointed out, as well as just a certain cultural expectation. And having a forum for them to meet each other, to develop ideas, to develop projects with each other is invaluable for them to retain their beliefs, to develop them, to introduce it to other people, and to get access to opportunities and people to build great businesses. As I said, we want our network members to invest in each other. We want them to serve as mentors, advisors, board members to help companies grow. We want them to access the talent network that we've developed to bring like-valued team members into their companies. And we want them to come up with new business ideas together and come up with initiatives that I'm not smart enough to think about. But if we get the smart people in a room, they will figure it out.
That's really wonderful. And in the long term, what is the aim? What is it you want to see from a sort of society as a whole, but just more specifically, the network that you've built, that kind of network of entrepreneurs and investors and like-minded team members that are all going to be promoting these particular perspectives and ultimately promoting the expansion of freedom and flourishing? What is the aim within that network, but also within society as a whole?
So our goal is to build a movement of over 1 million pro-liberty business leaders that are serving as the best representatives of, advocates for, and collaborators in capitalism that they can possibly be. And through that, deploy over $1 billion in capital to support great companies started by like-valued entrepreneurs, 10x the returns for investors with that. And for society, leverage not only those businesses making the world a better place, but also leverage the positions that these business leaders develop to amplify their stories and how they're making a positive impact for the world. I think part of the reason so many people, not just young people, but the public at large, have a negative view of capitalism is that they always think it's this faceless, greedy corporation that represents capitalism. They don't know the stories of the individuals behind these businesses, the struggles that they go through, the dedication they have to something other than money, to a higher cause that they're leveraging money and organizations in order to achieve. We need more business leaders to go out there and share their stories. And that's one of the things that we're going to be amplifying as we build this network out and as we help these leaders scale their companies.
It's really interesting, just from a sort of modern day perspective. Most people that think about very, very wealthy, very successful entrepreneurs, they think about people like Elon Musk or other entrepreneurs that are very, very well known politically. They've engaged in the political cycle in a sort of day-to-day basis. And actually, I mean, you know, Elon Musk has endorsed Donald Trump. That kind of perspective that they've sort of invest in those particular perspectives very specifically. Why do you think it's important then to ensure that these ideas are being promoted from a sort of less so day-to-day political cycle perspective, but more so from a wider philosophical perspective, that actually these ideas are important to promote, taking it away from the political cycle?
It's actually much more important to talk about these ideas outside of political cycles because, as you and I know, politics is a lagging indicator of social change. The leading indicator is the culture, and a lot of that comes from business and business leaders. And I think Elon is a perfect example of what we need more of, not just an entrepreneur who's doing incredible things to advance humanity, but willing to speak out just on his businesses and on the importance of what he's trying to do with his businesses, this vision for humanity and where he's taking us with renewable energy, becoming an interplanetary species, and getting people excited about what he's doing and his business. And it's a scary thing to do for most business leaders. Elon is attacked and criticized and has been getting attacked and criticized long before he engaged in politics. Keep in mind, but by sticking his neck out there, he put it out there to have his head chopped off. And, you know, Elon can get away with that, having as much money as he does and position that he does. A lot of other business leaders are scared to do that and articulate their story. That's one of the reasons I think so few business leaders are willing to go out there and speak their mind and to talk about capitalism. But if there's a group of like-value business leaders, if they're there to support each other and people, and they know they're not alone, Our goal is to give them the courage and the network to back them up, to go and talk about these principles, and so be able to bring more people in, to inspire more young people to do the same thing. When Elon's rocket was caught by those chopsticks, how many people, young people especially, got inspired to want to start their own business, to develop new technology, to do something to advance humanity like he did there? That's what we need more of. And we need more business leaders out there sharing what they're doing like that to inspire other people to do the same thing.
That's really wonderful. And it really shows the real important nature of the work that you're doing at Liberty Ventures. So I think it's absolutely brilliant that you're able to connect all of those wonderful people with each other, but also promoting these philosophical ideas from a business perspective and actually taking it away necessarily from the day-to-day political cycle, but also ensuring that the people that are actually providing value and providing economic growth and actually the productive portion of the economy, the business side of the economy, is promoting these particular ideas as well, which I think is really, really important. And just coming back to you for a second, I want to know what you think the sort of future of free markets and the future of the kind of liberty movement, I suppose, should look like, and indeed what it might look like over the next few years, purely because you've been in the movement for such a long time, and I'm not calling you old, but
I'm not as young as I was when I started Students for Liberty, so I'm no offense.
No offense taken. But I think that you've been around, you've seen so many organizations attempt to promote pro-freedom ideas across the world. What do you think that the future looks like? And what do you think are the most important, what are the challenges that people are going to be facing? But also, what is the most important thing that we focus our energy on? From your perspective.
I'll be very honest here. Since I spent more than half my life in the liberty movement at this point, which is an odd thing for me to realize, the liberty movement, I think, around the world is going through very trying times. The principles of a free society are being tested around the globe. There are alternative philosophies that are gaining ground everywhere, unfortunately. And I am worried that the liberty movement has tried to seek those one-size-fits-all and silver bullet strategies in order to make a difference in the world. And so it's actually fallen into the trap of alternative ideologies, which are based on that, an authoritarian top-down perspective of what to do. Advancing liberty is hard work. It requires a lot of strong fundamentals in engaging other people and social change. And we need more organizations and more people that are willing to do the hard work, knowing it's going to be hard. It's not simple. It's not let's find the right flip to switch in order to change everyone's minds and preserve liberty. It's a lot of on the ground work. It's a lot of one-on-one interactions, and it's a lot of getting people involved and engaged who haven't been before and are going to create different nodes of influence and opportunities for this. But that is the only way we're going to reinvigorate the passion for liberty that we saw a decade ago, that in America at least, and that we have the opportunity to bring back. But it's a scary thing, and I'm just going to keep coming back to the fact that it's hard work. And if we're scared of doing the hard work, then we're not going to preserve liberty in our lifetime.
Such an important message, I think, for so many people that work in this space. It's so important to, A, realize that it is hard work, but B, understand that the entire point of libertarian philosophy, well, so many points, but one of the main points of libertarian philosophy, that it isn't this pure silver bullet, one-size-fits-all solution to everything. The entire point of these kind of philosophies, where people are able to use spontaneous order in the free market and voluntary exchange, and there is that kind of, I suppose, spontaneous order in the market. We have no idea what that future looks like, and we have no idea what that future holds. But the point is that there are those moral philosophies that underpin it, and I think that's such an important message. Finally, before we finish up, what does your future hold? What is your career going to look like over the next few years? What do you think that your engagement in the liberty movement, but also beyond, where you've actually been connecting so many entrepreneurs and so many people that really need to be hearing these philosophies, but also be promoting it, what does that future look like for you?
Well, My commitment is to Liberty Ventures, and I got involved with this side of the Liberty movement because I didn't see anyone else doing it. That was why I was excited about Conscious Capitalism. That's why I'm excited about Liberty Ventures taking the next step with this, because we don't have enough capitalists actually standing up for capitalism. And I think that will be the game changer if we can get more of them to do this, and if we can help them develop positions with a stronger bully pulpit to influence people, stronger businesses where people recognize this is capitalism in action and they're excited about that and support it. And that's my number one focus. Now, admittedly, I'm still involved with a number of other organizations that I care about because sadly, I don't think we're as strong in other areas as we were 10 years ago. And we need to strengthen our work with other stakeholders as well. So my commitment is to figuring out how we do that, and especially to connect more business leaders with those other strategies as well, because I think they can be the game changer in making the world a freer place.
Alexander, thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you so much for sharing all of your wonderful wisdom and telling us all about your own moral philosophy. I think that was a really, really interesting conversation. Thank you.
This was great. Thank you, Reem.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you for watching or listening. If you have enjoyed this interview and you would like to hear more from the Institute of Academic Affairs, please do check out the IEA Insider community on insider.iea.org.uk.